I'm James Paul, author of What on Earth is Heaven, and I thought I would give you an idea of what is in the book by reading to you the introduction, which is titled Deeper into Reality. Come further up, come further in. Jewel the Unicorn in C.S. Lewis' The Last Battle. I was a Christian. I was going to heaven. The only problem was, I didn't want to go there. This sudden realization came to me as I was waiting to take off on a flight from London to Warsaw. I don't like flying. Because I'm a control freak, flying makes me nervous. I would be fine if I was flying the plane, but trusting my life to someone else I don't know is another matter. So I was sitting there imagining the plane crashing, contemplating death and what comes after death, when I suddenly realized that I didn't really want to go to heaven. I loved this life. I loved the feeling of sun on my face, the taste of olives on my tongue, the comfort of a hug, the smell of freshly washed linen. I loved walking in the English countryside. I loved the colours of spring. I loved jumping into a swimming pool on a hot day and feeling the cool water make my skin tingle. Nothing about heaven or the images of heaven I had been given excited me. Being a disembodied spirit living forever in an amorphous, shapeless future just didn't have any appeal. Floating on clouds, singing praise and worship choruses for eternity just didn't attract me. This all felt so wrong. Surely, as the greatest joy and fulfillment of the Christian life, I should want to go to heaven. I had become a Christian a few days after my 17th birthday. Before that, I was an agnostic. Although I believed there must be something more to life, I didn't know what that more was, or even if it really existed. I had hoped there was more than the final end of history, as the sun implodes and our solar system ceases to exist in 7 billion years' time. I hoped that there was some larger story to this thing we call life, and perhaps more pressingly to this person that I call me. This desire for meaning eventually led me to re-examine the words of Jesus Christ and the claims of the Christian faith. As I thought through the evidence, and as Christian friends patiently answered my many questions, I began to discover that there were solid reasons why I could trust that there was more to life than just these 70 years. As I began to think through the evidence for and implications of the death and resurrection of Jesus, I came to realize that death was not the end. Death was not the great negation of all that exists, but a future awaited those who would trust in Jesus Christ. A future called heaven. But what was heaven going to be like? And why did it seem so unappealing? Of course, the idea of heaven wasn't a total blank to me before I became a Christian. My father loves architecture and history, so our summer holidays in Europe were filled with visits to medieval cathedrals. As a child, I was more interested in the cheap football shirts for sale in the market stalls that filled the cathedral piazzas, but I would dutifully enter these dark, cavernous spaces and look around. I remember gazing up at the depictions of heaven that often covered the inside of the domes of these huge buildings. The paintings were often done in perspective, so that the space within the dome seemed to recede ever higher towards a sphere that existed above this earthly realm. Beyond a layer of clouds was a world filled with angelic beings, depicted as what I can only describe as fat babies with wings, who were singing God's praises while playing harps. Further above was the heavenly throne itself, from where God, a venerable old man with a flowing white beard, surveyed the earth below. I had also picked up my images of heaven from more popular sources. I'm a big fan of animated films, and one of my favourite characters is Scrat from the Ice Age movies. Scrat is a saber-toothed prehistoric squirrel who has an obsession with his favourite food, acorns. In one scene, following a desperate attempt to reach an acorn perched on a cliff edge, Scrat suffers a fatal fall and dies. When he wakes up, he is standing before a pair of golden gates with a central nut emblem. The gates open, and Scrat is admitted to Nut Heaven, a land of pink fluffy clouds full of acorns. In this paradise, Scrat dances from cloud to cloud as his deepest longings are finally fulfilled. He is just about to reach out and take hold of the largest, most delicious acorn he has ever seen when a mysterious force tugs him away back to Earth. His friend, the giant sloth Sid, has performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on his dead body, and Scrat has been forced to return, acorn-free, to his earthly life. These images had informed my pre-Christian imagination concerning heaven, and they continue to do so even when I became a Christian. Whenever I thought of heaven, all I could see was fluffy clouds and rosy-cheeked babies, and much of what I encountered after becoming a Christian didn't help. Most contemporary Christian art I came across depicted heaven using abstract mixes of colour and shape, with little or no substance to what life there would actually be like. In church, I was told that Christianity answered the question of how to get to heaven, and that we should share our faith to save souls for heaven. But I heard virtually nothing about what heaven was going to be like once we got there. And I couldn't see any relevance of heaven for our lives here and now, other than as a reward for believing the right things about Jesus. Heaven just didn't seem like it would be much fun. Yet if heaven is our eternal destiny, surely I should want to be there. I felt there must be something wrong with me. As I began to think more about these questions, I discovered there was a second problem to my belief in heaven. Where exactly was it? At the time I was sitting on that flight to Warsaw, I was a medical student. For the previous 5 years, I had learned to apply the methods of science to the study of the human body. I had seen how scientific inquiry had brought about huge advances in the diagnosis and treatment of human diseases, improving the quality and length of our lives. I could not ignore the power of the scientific way of seeing the world, yet this worldview had no place for heaven. It described a world of atoms and molecules and physical processes, but there was no room for anything beyond the material universe. If heaven was real, where was it? And why couldn't science find it? How could I both take the methods and discoveries of science seriously and still believe that a place called heaven really exists? These were the thoughts that were running through my head as I waited to take off on that flight to Warsaw. Perhaps you are in the same position as I was on that plane. Perhaps you believe in Jesus and in God, but you just don't find the idea of floating on clouds and singing hymns for eternity an attractive vision of the future. Perhaps you are wondering what heaven has to do with your life here and now on earth. Perhaps you are more sceptical about faith and question how it's possible to believe in a place called heaven when science has described the entire universe, from the smallest atom to the largest solar system. If you are that kind of person, then this book is for you. The Christian art historian Hans Ruckmacher said that to be a Christian means to go into reality. And that was just what I wanted to do as I sat on the plane to Warsaw. I wanted to move deeper into reality. I wanted to better understand heaven. So I did the only thing I could think of. I prayed. Lord God, help me to understand heaven. Help me to long for heaven. I only had to wait a few months before God began to answer that prayer. I was driving up to London from Cornwall with a friend, and to keep boredom away, my friend read out loud C.S. Lewis's children's novel, The Last Battle. In the book, and sorry for the plot spoiler, the central characters either die or pass through a magic door in a stable and find themselves in heaven. What I heard surprised me so much that when I arrived home, I got out my battered childhood copy of the book and reread the last few chapters. It was Lewis's description of the feeling of heaven that first caught my imagination. The term is over. The holidays have begun. That was something I could really relate to. I knew that feeling of joy and hope and release when, on the last day of a school year, the final bell rings and the humdrum of classroom routine is over and the endless freedom of the summer holidays lies ahead. That was a feeling I recognized and longed for. If heaven was like that, then I wanted to be there. Yet it wasn't just that feeling which excited me. It was also Lewis's description of heaven itself. The heaven in Narnia wasn't an ethereal spirit world of angel wings, cherubs, harps and clouds. Neither was it the amorphous colour palette of the contemporary Christian art I had seen. The heaven that the children and talking animals of Narnia reached had a physicality to it. It was full of trees and fields and streams and rivers and waterfalls and sunshine. It was a world in which the characters were still themselves and still had bodies that could run and jump and laugh and eat and hug. It was a reality that contained everything of the old Narnia they loved and valued, only now those things and those people were different. They weren't less real, but more real. They were as different as a real thing is from a shadow, or as waking life is from a dream. It was a place that got bigger and more real and more glorious the further you went into it. "Come further up, come further in," cried the creatures of that world. What I began to see from Lewis was that I had got things the wrong way around. I had been taught to see this world as the real thing, and heaven as some spiritual shadow world. I had assumed heaven was less than the physical experience I knew, and a lot of which I loved. However, Lewis was proposing a heaven that is a deeper, fuller, even more concrete reality than this world. Rather than heaven being the shadow version, it is this world that is the shadowy copy of the more solid and more real things to come. It is not so much that heaven will be full of things we love from this world, but rather that we love things in this world because they are the things of heaven. This was a heaven I wanted to be in. You may be thinking that this is all very well, but The Last Battle is a work of fiction and not the Bible. But what I came to see was that Lewis was attempting to capture a biblical view of heaven in his stories of Narnia. The Bible itself also speaks of the life to come as a material future, in which we will be ourselves and have physical bodies. Indeed, I came to see that the heaven the Bible describes is not a less solid place than this life, but a dimension which completes and fulfills this world. The Bible describes this future not just as heaven, but as a new heaven and a new earth. The story of the Bible isn't about us escaping into heaven, but rather about God bringing heaven to earth, so that the whole creation is renewed and restored. The purpose then of the Christian life is not to float off into the clouds and become a disembodied soul or an angel with wings. The purpose of the Christian life is to play our part, however small, in bringing heaven to earth. It has been over 25 years since I prayed that prayer on the flight to Warsaw. During those years, God has continued to show me answers to my questions and to lead me deeper into reality. Now I long to be in heaven, or should I say, I long for heaven to be fully here on earth. This book is the result of that prayer. I share with you the answers I have found in the hope that you also may move deeper into the wonderful reality that God has created for us to enjoy. Come further up, come further in.